Washington, D.C., January the 16th, 1957. A retired rear admiral steps in front of the national press. The reporters know exactly who he is. Delmer Farney, Naval Academy, class of 1920. A master's in aeronautical engineering from MIT, the officer who built the Navy's radio-controlled drone programs in the 1930s. The first commander of the Missile Test Center at Point Mugu, the man credited with coining the very phrase, guided missile. When the newspapers need a shorthand, they call him the father of the guided missile. And what the father of the guided missile tells the country, the day after a brand new organization's board of governors meets for the first time, is this: that reliable reports show objects entering our atmosphere at very high speed, that no nation on Earth could match their speeds and accelerations, that the signs point, his word, carried by the Associated Press and the New York Times, to an intelligence directing them. He is careful. He has never seen a saucer himself. He holds no fixed view on where they come from. It does not matter. Nearly every paper in the United States runs the story, and many abroad, the organization's own confidential director's report will say so a month later and credit that coverage with pulling the committee out of what it calls a shaky condition. The organization is not yet 3 months old. It is called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. For the next decade, it will be the most respected civilian UFO body in America. The serious one, the one with the admirals.
Everybody remembers the admiral at the microphone. That's what an admiral at a microphone is for. What nobody in that room knew to ask was who had been running the committee behind him. Because 4 weeks earlier, the man appointed as NICAP's top active officer was a professional propagandist, a psychological warfare specialist who wrote Voice of America scripts for a living and who had been personally introduced to the Director of Central Intelligence. That introduction is in an FBI file. You can order it from the National Archives.
This season has shown you a deception machine, documented, and a hypothesis about the summer it may have been switched on, flagged always as a hypothesis. This episode is about neither the sky nor the codes. It is about a committee. How do you build the most credible civilian organization in the most ridiculed field in America? And why does its founding paperwork keep leading back to the same professions? The dominant flag on this episode is contested. We intend to earn that word. This is the Deception Thread, Episode 6, Building a Front. To understand why NICAP was founded, you have to understand the 2 years before it, because NICAP was not founded in response to a sighting. It was founded in response to a gap. Start in Kentucky. The night of August the 21st, 1955, near the farm towns of Kelly and Hopkinsville, a family named Sutton reports an hours-long siege by small, luminous, large-eared creatures and fires on them repeatedly with a shotgun. The story draws national press. Believers cite it. Debunkers dine out on it. Hold on to the flavor of that story, because it is exactly the flavor the founders of NICAP would build their organization to get away from. That same year, retired Marine Corps Major Donald Kehoe publishes his third saucer book, The Flying Saucer Conspiracy, his most pointed. It accuses elements of the government of suppressing flying saucer evidence, and it gives readers an image that will organize the next 20 years of this subject, a silence group, inside officialdom, enforcing a cover-up. Kehoe's conclusion, that the saucers were interplanetary and the government knew it, was his interpretation, and this show treats it as exactly that. But his book supplied the central rationale for an organized, civilian investigative body. Within a year, he would be running one. Then, in October 1955, comes the trigger. The Air Force publicly releases a version of Project Blue Book Special Report Number 14, a statistical study of its own sighting files performed by the Battelle Memorial Institute. The press release frames it as science closing the case. The study, it says, has shown the saucers are not real. The data underneath says something else. Of nearly 2,000 fully analyzable cases, roughly 23% were judged unexplained, and a further 31% only doubtfully explained. The unknowns were statistically distinct from the knowns. One caution, spoken out loud, because this show made a promise about numbers. The most cited unexplained figure is about 22%, and sources vary on the decimals. The historically important fact is not the precise percentage. It is the distance between the numbers in the study and the words in the press release.
That gap is the whole story of 1955. The Air Force didn't fake the data. The data is right there, in its own contracted study. It faked the summary. And here's the thing about a managed narrative. You don't need everyone to catch you. You need a few motivated people to catch you, and then you've handed them the one asset money can't buy in this field: a legitimate grievance.
Through 1956, the grievance compounds. Edward Ruppelt, the former head of Project Blue Book, the officer who coined the term UFO, publishes an insider account of how the Air Force actually studied the subject, seriously in private while dismissing it in public. A note for the careful, cite his 1956 first edition. In 1960, Ruppelt issued a revised edition that reversed his tone and aligned with the official line, for evidentiary purposes, a different document. In May, a semi-documentary film, built on the 1952 Washington sightings and the account of an Air Force press officer, carries the cover-up narrative into the theaters. In June, Columbia releases Earth versus the Flying Saucers, credited to Kehoe's own 1953 book. By the summer of 1956, the saucer is everywhere, as a suspicion and as a punchline. And here the record holds a case this episode must handle with gloves. On the night of August the 13th to 14th, 1956, RAF and U.S. Air Force personnel at bases in eastern England log multiple radar and visual contacts, including a jet intercept. Lakenheath Bentwaters, one of the strongest military radar visual cases on record. Say the flag out loud. This case was not publicly known in 1956. Its detailed account surfaced only in 1968, when the Lakenheath Watch supervisor wrote to the Colorado study, and the buried intelligence reports were recovered. It did not drive NICAP's founding. It could not have. What it shows is something quieter. High-quality cases were accumulating, unseen in the files, while the public argument ran on press releases. October the 24th, 1956. Incorporation papers filed in Washington in late August take effect, and the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena legally exists, under, of all people, an inventor named Thomas Townsend Brown, a man preoccupied with what he called electrogravitics, anti-gravity, with Brown, Stan Kehoe, the author Morris Jessup, and the organizers of Washington's Saucer Club circuit. Step back, and the events of 1955 and 56 sort into two currents. One is institutional, a statistical report spun in public, an insider's book, a documentary, a steady, respectable case that the government was concealing what it knew. The other is the contactee carnival, the Adamski circuit, the convention scene, which had turned flying saucer into vaudeville. NICAP positioned itself precisely in the gap between them. It borrowed the cover-up thesis's urgency. It repudiated the contactee's credulity, and it staffed its letterhead with admirals, generals, and scientists to make the difference visible at a glance.
Notice what the founding stimulus actually was. It wasn't a craft. It wasn't a landing. It was interpretive. The distance between what officials said and what their own data showed. That matters for everything that follows, because a controversy like that isn't just a grievance. It's a market. Thousands of serious-minded people, alienated from the official channel, looking for somebody credible to trust. And markets get served. The only question is by whom?
Who served this one is a question with paperwork. Act 2 is about the paperwork. Here is how the most famous grassroots organization in UFO history was actually launched. Not at a rally, at a PR firm. The contemporaneous record, preserved in NICAP's own officer correspondence, runs like this. An understanding is reached on August the 16th, 1956. On August the 29th, the incorporators hold their first meeting. Brown becomes executive vice chairman. A man named O'Keefe becomes treasurer. And the post of secretary goes to a woman named Mary Vaughn King. 2 days later, a contract is signed. The signature on it is King's, because Mary Vaughn King was also the president of Counsel Services, Incorporated, of 219 West Monument Street, Baltimore. The firm NICAP engaged to direct its organization, its public relations, and its membership program was run by NICAP's own first secretary. The terms are in the file, and one clause worth reading twice. Any additional consultants the committee approved would work under the supervision of the senior officers of the firm. In plain language, the people who would actually build NICAP, its staff, its structure, its recruiting, were to be hired through and answerable to Counsel Services. That clause is the documented channel through which the founding-era personnel arrived. And Counsel Services was not an arm's-length vendor picked from the phone book. Brown said so himself years later in a 1971 letter to a NICAP staffer. His own foundation had retained the Baltimore firm earlier. In connection with Project Winter Haven, his electrogravitics proposal, prepared for the Defense Department under an intended secret classification that was never approved. Writing 15 years on, Brown had forgotten King's name. She appears in his letter only as the woman in charge of the Baltimore public relations firm. A small human illustration of why this show trusts the contemporaneous record over anyone's memory, including a founder's. Now read the firm's launch plan. First, recruit a high-caliber board of governors, persons whose stature would establish what the contract calls the unimpeachable sincerity of the committee. Then an advisory council. Only then open the doors to members. Initial press releases to be handled, the contract's phrase, with extreme care, every precaution taken against premature publicity that would brand the group amateurs.
Read that plan cold with no names attached and tell me what it describes. Credibility first, engineered deliberately, brass before substance. Get the admirals on the letterhead and only then let the public in. Now, to be fair, that's also just competent public relations. Every trade association in Washington runs that play. But it means the thing everyone remembers about NICAP, the wall of stars and eagles that made it believable, wasn't an accident of who showed up. It was the product spec, written down, priced monthly, before a single member joined.
By November the 6th, King relinquishes the secretary's chair, not to leave, but to run the firm's management liaison work. A John Kendrick takes the title, plus one more name, carried on the committee's own letterhead not as a governor, but over the evaluation of UFO reports, General Albert C. Wedemeyer, author of the 1941 Victory Program, commander of U.S. forces in China, one of the principal strategic planners of the Second World War. A man with, the record is clear on this, no known prior interest in flying saucers at all. Why does a 4-star strategic planner with no saucer interest lend his name to a 3-month-old saucer committee? Hold the question. Act 3 answers it, and this time the documents allow more than you would expect. Because first, you need to know what else was in Counsel Services' client book. The firm's clients included Brown's Foundation, NICAP, and a Baltimore operation run by Colonel Julius Amos, an OSS veteran whose private outfit, the International Services of Information Foundation, specialized in psychological warfare and emigre anti-communist networks. And Amos was not only a client. On the 16th of November, 1953, the Washington Post ran the second piece in a series on him, under the headline, "Global Private Eye Dwells in Constant Air of Mystery." It reported that his general headquarters was a rented house on Gibson Island in the Chesapeake, but that the business office was at 219 West Monument Street, Baltimore. Counsel Services address, and it had been Counsel Services address since March of 1947. The public relations firm was there first. The private intelligence service came to it. And look at what the colonel was actually selling. The International Services of Information was a membership organization, $25 a year. For that, members received his intelligence reports, datelined by courier from Munich, from Dusseldorf, and the Post noted dryly that when Amos passed along a rumor, he was careful to label it a rumor. Dues, a periodical, a decorated colonel's name at the top of it.
Hold that shape, because you have already met it. Dues, a magazine, and a wall of rank on the letterhead. That is NICAP, and the firm that advertised fundraising and membership work as its trade had both of them in its client book at its own street address, 9 years apart. Now the flags, and I want them heard. 2 outfits at one address in a row house office district is not by itself a conspiracy. Firms share buildings, and a PR firm routinely furnishes a business address for clients it services. That may be all this was. But notice the shape. The firm is the infrastructure. The client is the face.
And Amos carries his own exhibit into this story. In May of 1952, 4 years before NICAP existed, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations opened a special inquiry, File 24-411. The subject, a sighting on the Ritchie Highway, south of Baltimore on the 29th of March. A disc-like craft hovering 200 feet above a car, the engine dead, the paint cracked. The inquiry happened because the Air Technical Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson had been told about it, and the man who told them was Colonel Julius Amos. When the OSI agent interviewed Amos, the colonel said he had no direct knowledge of the incident at all. He had simply passed along what he had been handed by a Baltimore radio news commentator named Lou Corbin of station WFBR, who had interviewed the 2 witnesses himself in April.
So, no. The colonel did not see a flying saucer. He did something more interesting than that. 4 years before NICAP, a private intelligence operator in Baltimore was sitting between a local newsman and Air Force technical intelligence, moving saucer material from one to the other. He wasn't a witness. He was a channel. And I use that word carefully because you heard it earlier in the series in its technical sense. And I am not claiming this was one. I am saying look at the position he chose to occupy.
So, a pre-existing PR firm tied to the founder's classified track research, contractually empowered to hire the builders, executing a written plan to manufacture credibility, with a client book that reaches into Baltimore's private intelligence world. All of that is documented. None of it yet is an intelligence officer inside NICAP. For that, you need the 2 men the firm's machinery actually installed. December the 17th, 1956. NICAP's Executive Committee issues Progress Report Number 1 to its Board of Governors. 2 lines in it matter more than everything else this episode. The first records an appointment. The committee names a successor to Brown as executive vice chairman, the organization's top active officer, since the chairman's seat still stands vacant, effective the next day. The man's name is Nicolas de Rochefort, and where his credentials should be, the report says only this.
Personal history to follow.
Let us supply it. Born St. Petersburg, 1902, to a Russian mother and a French father, the family flees the revolution, fights for France in the Second World War, taken prisoner, released under circumstances his own file calls ambiguous. Arrives in America in 1949, where the FBI begins tracking him almost immediately and keeps a file that runs over 200 pages. His profession, in the file's own descriptions, propaganda. A skilled propagandist, a convincing speaker, government research from 1952, Voice of America scriptwriting in French and Russian, a 1955 assessment praising his talent for mass agitation and word-of-mouth campaigns. In 1954, his address at a Freedom Day rally in New Hampshire is broadcast by the Voice of America in 3 languages and entered into the congressional record. In 1953, he organizes the Committee of 1 Million, the China lobby's million-signature petition machine against seating Red China at the UN, judged one of the most effective pressure campaigns in Washington. And then the single most striking item in the released file. A 1956 FBI report cites a letter from Congressman Walter Judd in which Judd states that he personally introduced de Rochefort to the Secretary of State and to the Director of Central Intelligence, Allen Dulles. The lines that follow are redacted under the exemption that protects intelligence sources and methods. Say the flag precisely because this is the hinge of the episode. The released record establishes propaganda tradecraft, anti-communist network standing, and a personal introduction at the very top of the intelligence hierarchy. It does not produce a CIA payroll record. A historian who suspected the Committee of 1 Million was an agency product sued for de Rochefort's CIA file and was blocked on national security grounds. Almost certain CIA asset is how the modern researchers put it, strongly supported and on released documents formally unproven. Contested, that is the word, and we will not say a stronger one.
Even the flourishes on this man dissolve when you grip them. The UFO writers styled him Count de Rochefort, no verified title. The FBI file records aliases Nicolas Hardstone, Armand Duplessis. His POW release has 2 competing explanations. But strip away everything unverified and look at what's left, because what's left is the thesis of this series in 1 sentence. The man installed as the top active officer of America's premier civilian UFO organization in the 3rd month of its existence was, by profession, documented across 200 pages, a manufacturer of belief. Not a soldier who drifted in, not an enthusiast, the actual craft of shaping what populations think. That was his trade. And the launch machinery put him at the head of the roster.
Beside him sits the second sensitive seat. The same first progress report announces the membership operation in 1 flat administrative line.
The membership subcommittee under the direction of Mr. Bernard Carvalho has begun work.
Bernard J.O. Carvalho, a native of Lisbon, Portugal, and per NICAP's own January records, a major in the United States Air Force Reserve. His signature survives on the membership solicitation letters. By January the 7th, he is also special advisor for Space Magazine, the committee's planned popular monthly, authorized to negotiate its publishing contracts. At the first annual meeting, it is Carvalho who presents the membership and publications plans. So the documented remit is who joins and what they are told. The 2 levers an influence operation would want above all others. And General Wedemeyer? The question we parked in Act 2. We can answer it now, and we can answer it from the standard history of Allied deception. Thaddeus Holt's The Deceivers, 900 pages, Scribner, 2004. Start with how America organized this work. The British put it in one place, the London Controlling Section, a dedicated secret staff whose only job was deceiving the enemy. The Americans split the job in 2, and the split is the thing to hold on to because 1/2 of it outlived the war. In August 1942, the Joint Chiefs chartered Joint Security Control. At the start, its writ was narrow. It could recommend, it was kept out of planning, and for carrying deception out, it had coordinating authority. That narrowness did not last. In August 1943, the Combined Chiefs issued the directive governing deception against Japan, and it handed Joint Security Control the operational half of the whole enterprise, coordinating the execution of approved deception outside the theater that originated it, implementing the parts that had to be implemented from Washington, which in practice meant the channels, the controlled agents, the planted leaks, the false radio traffic, the machinery by which a lie actually reaches the enemy and is believed. By 1945, Joint Security Control was placing deception officers into theater headquarters and synchronizing 4 theater commands at once. But the writing of the plans never moved. Holt's words, "The American Joint Planners did not develop a separate deception planning entity. Deception plans, like other plans, emanated from the regular planners. And the officers most directly involved were Army officers of the Operations Division, whose most important subdivision was the Strategy and Policy Group, which one general called the brain trust of the Army." From June 1942 to September 1943, the man who ran the Strategy and Policy Group was Brigadier General Albert C. Wedemeyer.
So hold both halves, because you need both. Joint Security Control ran the machinery, and machinery is a standing thing. It does not get demobilized the way a plan does. You have already heard in the series where that machinery went after 1945. The plans came from somewhere else. They came out of the Operations Division. And in the 15 months when the Americans were learning to do this at all, from scratch with the British a year ahead of them, the Operations Division office where they were learning, it was Wedemeyer's.
And he is not a name on an org chart. In the last days of 1942, Colonel John Bevan, the head of British Strategic Deception, the man who ran the London Controlling Section, came to Washington. An American colonel undertook to arrange for Bevan to meet, in Holt's phrase, the key American planners, Generals Handy and Wedemeyer and Admiral Cook. 3 men. He is one of the 3. Bevan went home, and a few days later, on Monday the 11th of January, 1943, 2 officers inside Wedemeyer's group were pulled off their regular work and put on something the Army had never done before. One of them was a major named William Baumer. He wrote it down in his diary that month.
January 11th. I was turned over to a special project with Colonel Kem. It is fascinating work and something new to the War Department and to our Army. The British have a start on us of perhaps a year. No one knows where it will lead, and there is no path that is clear-cut for us to follow. All of which pleases me greatly. We can therefore strike out for ourselves and see what happens.
That is the American Deception Program, on day 1, in the handwriting of the man assigned to it. And say the flag with me, because I want this exact. Holt does not tell us who signed that detail. Baumer says only that he was turned over. What the record gives us is the room. The 2 men picked for it worked in the Strategy and Policy Group. Wedemeyer ran the Strategy and Policy Group.
3 months later, on the 7th of April, 1943, at Wedemeyer's suggestion, the Joint Planners directed a subcommittee to draft a separate deception policy for the Pacific Theater, at his suggestion. And that same April, he approved a trip to England by Baumer to meet the British deception agencies. Baumer would become the American half of the deception partnership that covered D-Day and would fly to Moscow with Bevan to sell it to Stalin's staff. By the spring of 1945, the Allies were running for the first time a single coordinated deception against Japan across every theater of the Pacific War. Holt lists who held what. Mountbatten had skeptical, MacArthur had conscious, MacArthur and Nimitz had pastel, and in 4 words, Wedemeyer had Iceman. 4 theaters, 4 commanders, working in concert for the first time. One of the 4 was the man whose name would appear, 11 years later, over the evaluation of America's flying saucer reports. Iceman is worth one more sentence because of how it worked. 2 offensive plans were handed to the Chinese Military Council. 3 men in China knew that one of them was fiction, Chiang, his chief of staff, and the Minister of War. The Chinese staffs working on the 2 plans did not know a cover plan existed. Hundreds of officers doing sincere, competent work on an operation that existed to be leaked. It worked because the people producing the paperwork believed in it.
Now, I want to be careful here, because that mechanism sounds exactly like the thesis of the series, and that's precisely why I'm not going to pretend it's evidence. It isn't. It's a parallel. It tells you this man understood and used, at the scale of a war theater, the idea that the most convincing product comes from people who don't know what they're part of. It does not tell you he did that in 1956. Nothing tells you that. What it tells you is what his name on a letterhead was actually worth.
Which brings us back to the letterhead. When the general's involvement became public, he left, and NICAP's own magazine in July 1957 printed the reason under a headline with his name in it.
Evaluation of UFO reports listed by the former management as under General A. C. Wedemeyer hereafter will be made by our Special Advisor Panel. NICAP thanks General Wedemeyer for his services and regrets the unexpected publicity and flood of mail which caused him to withdraw. In graciously allowing NICAP time to replace him, General Wedemeyer said he had never intended for the former management to make his name public. We regret that the general's name was released.
The former management, Brown's people, the ones the Baltimore firm was hired to install, they listed him. And by his own account, he never intended the public to know. Say the flag one last time and say it plainly. No document in this record connects the war to the letterhead. No recruitment record exists. We have found nothing showing he did anything for NICAP but appear on its stationery. What we have is this. In the third month of its existence, the evaluation of America's flying saucer reports was listed as the responsibility of the officer who had run the office where American strategic deception was planned. And the moment his name went public, he was gone. A strategic planner content to evaluate flying saucer evidence, so long as no one knew. Whatever that was, it was not publicity seeking. January the 14th and 15th, 1957. The first annual meeting, the one that the first progress report promised would add 5 new board members. Instead, it removes the founder. Brown is ousted amid concern that NICAP money might flow into his anti-gravity research. Kehoe becomes director. Farney is elected chairman of the Board of Governors and holds the press conference where this episode began. In April, Farney himself resigns, citing his wife's illness and business pressure. A rumor that the Navy forced him out circulates among members. He refutes it by telegram, in writing, under no compulsion, personal reasons. We carry it as what it is, a rumor, denied by the man himself, preserved in an interested party's bulletin. And the 2 men from the sensitive seats? Gone. Both of them. Within weeks of Brown's fall, along with the rest of the proto-NICAP team. The reconstituted board that emerges pivots hard toward establishment stature. The president of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, a former Pentagon monitor of Project Blue Book. In time, Roscoe Hillenkoetter himself, the first director of Central Intelligence. The famous, credible NICAP dates from that reshuffle. The propagandist and the membership man belonged to its first 100 days. And now, as promised, the show argues against itself, and this time the counter-witness is unimpeachable because he was there on Kehoe's side of the desk. Richard Hall, Kehoe's own assistant director, confirmed decades later that de Rochefort and Carvalho were organizers with, his phrase, past CIA connections. And then he shrugged. The proto-NICAP plans were grandiose and unrealistic, scrapped within months. Once Kehoe took over, the CIA men were, in Hall's words, totally gone. Nothing operational ever came of them.
Here's how I hold it, after years in these files. If someone ordered NICAP built as a front, I can't prove it. And honestly, The evidence leans against anything that tidy. But no conspiracy doesn't mean nothing happened. Look at what is documented. The era's most respected civilian UFO body was launched by a PR contract that engineered its credibility on purpose. Its first top officer manufactured belief for a living and had been walked in to meet Alan Dulles. Its membership and magazine sat under an Air Force Reserve major, and the evaluation of its UFO reports was listed under the general who ran the office where American strategic deception was invented, who quit the moment his name got out. Every one of those people arrived through the same small Baltimore-Washington machine. Whether anyone gave an order is contested. Who was standing in the room is not. And in this subject, the room is the story.
The deception lesson of 1956 is about position. If you want to shape what a community believes, the worst place to stand is outside it, arguing. The best place is holding the tent poles, deciding who joins, what they read, and which cases count as credible. Run the grammar one more time. The credibility gap was the seed, planted, if you like, by the Air Force's own press office. The brass first launch plan was the amplifier. Membership and the magazine were the management. And the harvest? Ask the question the season always asks. Who benefits? A committee that promised to fight official secrecy, built from its first invoice by professionals of official secrecy. On the documented record, the honest answer is whoever in the years ahead would find it useful that America's saucer believers had gathered themselves into one room with one mailing list. Next time, on the deception thread. The reconstituted board gets its crown jewel. The first director of Central Intelligence, Roscoe Hillencutter, puts his name in the congressional record demanding the Air Force come clean, and then, in private letters, takes it all back. A documented disinformation operation is run against NICAP with faked wire service stories, and the science that was supposed to settle everything is managed before it begins. Because for 12 years, one member of NICAP's board never told the others what he used to do for the CIA. In 1969, he called the meeting that ended it all. Episode 7, Extend and Withdraw.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. Remember, we don't teach you what to believe, we teach you how to think. This is the Circle Jerk.